Hello everyone, my name is Mariella Herberstein. I'm the Chair of Academic Senate and I'm using this video blog to summarize the last Senate meeting which happened on November 1st. This Senate meeting had a very full agenda, so hang on to your hats. All the resolutions of that Senate meeting is summarized in the Senate in Brief, the URL you can see below, and the full minutes will be available for the November 1 meeting once we have approved them at the December 6 meeting. Alright, so as always, we start the Senate meeting with acknowledging the country. We welcomed all the observers and we noted their apologies and approved the minutes from the previous meetings. There was a couple of amendments for the minutes. One was about Resolution 16/215, which added the rescission of the practical placements policy. And also added an amendment to the general coursework rule to reflect the scope of the academic appeals policy. So those changes were made to the minutes, and there were also some changes made to the minutes for Resolution 16/210. There was just a correction of wording, but other than these amendments, there were no changes to the minutes, and the minutes were approved by Senate. There were a couple of items that arose from the minutes. First of all, the academic appeals policy and procedure. Senate had circulated a draft version of the appeals policy and procedure to members of Senate, but also to the faculty boards. And we've also met with a student focus group and received quite a bit of feedback. We then presented to Senate a paper on what the feedback was and how the feedback was incorporated into the policy and the procedure documents. And after a very brief discussion, the Senate resolved to approve the policy and procedure of academic appeals, which will be effective from January 1st, 2017. The second business arising from the minutes was the review of the Masters of Research and the recommendations stemming from that review. Professor Saki Pretorius, who is the chair of the Research and Research Training Committee, presented a response paper to the review recommendations. The review itself was conducted by Professor Jim Angus. The paper detailed how the Research and Research Training Committee will deal with individual recommendations, and this plan was endorsed by Senate. Professor Pretorius also finished his report by summarizing some of the additional activities that the Research and Research Training Committee has been up to, including forming a working party to look at cross-disciplinary research, reviewing how the Code of Responsible Research is being implemented, and also developing the research active definition for the university. This then led to the next agenda item, which was the report from the chair, so the report from me. I had a number of thanks and congratulations to communicate. First of all, a thank you to Professor Simon George, who is finishing his term as member of Academic Senate. He's been on Senate for several years now. And the second thanks was to Professor John Simons, who is retiring as a DVC academic. I also extended my congratulations to Amanda Barnier, who was elected Fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences. As with all my reports, I start off the report with giving an update on how the projects for Academic Senate are progressing, and you can see the table of projects now. And as you can see, almost half of the projects have already been completed, and the rest of the projects are in progress and with a timeline of completion either the end of this year or early next year. As these projects are finished or being finished, it's now time to consider projects for 2017. There are already a number of potential projects that are being discussed at Senate, such as a project on consolidating the policies that have to do with academic matters, a project on shared governance with faculty boards, But overall, I asked senators to consult with their officers and their faculties and bringing ideas for projects that are important for Senate to deal with to the next meeting, Senate meeting in December. I also presented an update on my discussions with individual senators. Over the last few months, I've tried to meet with as many senators as possible to discuss their views of Senate and how Senate is working for them. And in summary, the main aspects, the main points that were made was that overall the senators felt very positive about a project-based approach for Senate, that we are prioritizing the business of Senate, and I'm also very happy with a more haphazard and random seating arrangement during the Senate meetings. What they weren't so fond about was the very long agendas. There was a degree of unclarity about the role of senators, and there's also a scope to improve the quality of communication both within Senate but also inter Senate and out of Senate. Next, we had the Vice-Chancellor's update. The Vice-Chancellor talked about John Simon's upcoming retirement. He thanked the DVCA for his work for the university. He informed us that Professor Kevin Jemison will take on the role of acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic until that role is filled. The Vice-Chancellor also informed us of some new appointments for the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics. So Professor Stephen Brammer from the UK will take on that role, and there's also a new Chief Financial Officer, Robin Payne, who will join the university shortly. The Vice-Chancellor then gave us a perspective on a number of government policies that are currently under discussions and how they may affect higher education and and the workings of Macquarie University. He gave an update on the alignment between the MGSM and the Faculty of Business and Economics, and informed Senate that the student load projections for 2016 are quite positive, particularly involving an improvement of international enrollment numbers. The Vice-Chancellor also informed us of the Prime Minister's Prize for Science and two winners coming from Macquarie University, Professor Michael Aitken and Mr. Gary Tilley, who conducted a practicum who was a practicum supervisor for Macquarie University's opening real science program. There was also a gold medal awarded to a Macquarie University student group at the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition, IGEM. And finally, the Vice-Chancellor reported on the recent Vice-Chancellor Learning and Teaching Awards that he presented. Following the Vice-Chancellor's update, we had question time, which is aimed to allow senators to ask either the Chair of Senate or the Vice-Chancellor any questions, but at this meeting, no questions were raised. We introduced a new agenda item to the Senate agenda, which is student-led business, to allow student senators to raise issues at Senate. And the issue raised at this meeting was the release of past exam papers. Some units are exempted from having to release their exam papers, which is stipulated in the assessment policy, but by not releasing the exam paper, it makes it in cases difficult for students to prepare for the exam, particularly at 100 level. This point was then discussed very broadly at Senate, and two resolutions were formed. First, at ASQC, the Academic Standard Qualities Committee would review the current exemptions of the assessment policy, and also that the relevant faculty board will take on the specific example given and then report back to Senate. Our next agenda item were items for approval. The first item to approve was the Doctor for Medicine, a global MD, we had a presentation by Professor Patrick McNeill, the Executive Dean for the Faculty of Health and Medical Sciences, and Patrick described the aim, scope and structure of this new program. It's the first of its type in Australia. It has a substantial study abroad broad component, and Macquarie University already has an Indian partner for this and is looking for now a North American partner. The next step in this program is to seek approval from the Australian Medical Board. We had some very positive discussion about this new initiative, and Senate resolved to approve this program. That completed the items that we had to approve, and we moved on to items for discussion. The first item for discussion was the review of delegations of authority. This was reviewed externally, and a report was submitted to the university, and this report raises the issue of the faculty boards that have been established a few years ago, but they currently lack formal delegations. So we have an opportunity to share governance and delegations between Senate, the Senate committees and the faculty boards. And so I proposed to form a working party to develop a model of shared delegation and also to develop the frameworks of implementation. Members of Senate have approved this working party, and we will report back to Senate how this working party is progressing in future Senate meetings. Now, the review of delegations raises sort of a general question about the purpose and composition of Senate. This overall question also arises from my interviews with the individual senators. So it is timely to consider the function of Senate, and then once we are comfortable with the function of Senate, defining the function of Senate, then we need to consider whether the composition of Senate is suitable for fulfilling its function. So the proposal that I made to Senate was to form a small working party to develop a plan of activities that will help us define Senate's function. And Senate approved this course of action, and I will report back to Senate in the December meeting on this plan of activities. The next agenda item was a presentation by Professor Sherman Young on the undergraduate domestic entry pathways at Macquarie University. Sherman gave an overall overview of the ATAR system and then detailed the Macquarie University's non-ATAR pathways that are available, which includes the Global Leadership Entry Program, the Schools Recommendation Scheme, and academic entry. Sherman stressed that there's a need to communicate these pathways very clearly to schools and potential students, and he's working with future students on that. Then the final item for discussion was an update from the Academic Integrity Working Party, which is chaired by Associate Professor Judy Homewood. The aim of the Working Party is to review the recommendations made in a paper by the previous chair of Academic Senate, Professor Dominic Verity. So Judy presented to Senate a prioritized list of activities around academic integrity, and these activities were prioritized for the short, medium, and long term. She also proposed the formation of a student advisory group to participate in the development of the academic integrity framework for the university, and Senate approved the formation of the advisory group, and Judy plans to come back to Senate with further updates on the academic integrity framework. As there was no further business, this brought us to the end of the meeting for November 1. The next Senate meeting is on December 6, starting at 9:30. Senate meetings are open to all staff and students as observers, so please email the email below if you wish to attend the next Senate meeting. And with that, I'll leave you to it. Thank you for listening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.